as they innovate.
Cucumber melon, milk snow, and charred lace.
It's almost too beautiful to eat.
At the beginning of the movie, a couple, Margot and Taylor, are seen sailing to the island where an exclusive restaurant called Hawhorn. Tyler is indeed a food critic, so the experience of fine dining at Hawhorn restaurant is one of his dreams. Unfortunately, the experience of fine dining at Hawhorn cannot be felt by just anyone. This experience can only be felt by people who are rich and able to pay fantastic prices. To go to the island, the visitors must use a boat that has been prepared by the restaurant staff. Besides Margot and Tyler, there are several other guests who also attend the fine dining, including a food critic named Lillian and her editor named Ted, a wealthy couple, Richard and Anne, a famous movie star named George and his assistant named Felicity, and 3 successful businessmen named Soren, Dev, and Bryce. Arriving on the island, the visitors were greeted by a waitress named Elsa. She listed one by one the guests who had made reservations, but it turned out that Margot's name was not included in the guest list. This happened because Tyler had broken up with the woman he was going to invite, and Margot was now his date who would replace his former lover. After that, the guests were invited to take a tour around the island. Elsa explained that on this island, they breed quality ingredients that will later be processed by the chefs. Long story short, the fine dining event began. All guests were invited to sit in the place that had been prepared, while watching the reliable chefs cooking various dishes.
As they innovate.
Cucumber melon, milk snow, and charred lace.
A manager and head chef named Julian introduced himself to each guest. He is responsible for introducing each menu that will be served as well as conveying a little message behind each menu. Tyler, who is a big fan of Chef Julian, certainly feels moved to be able to enjoy his dishes. He looks very excited and can quickly understand every message that Chef Julian wants to convey through each menu.
Around the island, placed on rocks from filtered seawater, which will...
It's almost too beautiful to eat.
While Margot herself is actually just an ordinary person who only follows and accompanies Tyler, so it can be seen that Margot's goal is just to eat well and be full. But like fine dining, the menu served is usually in small portions, so Margot is not too appetizing to eat it. Besides Margot, the other guests apparently also felt the same way. They were a little disappointed because they had set too high expectations. But in fact, the menu served was not that good and even considered ordinary, especially when Chef Julian served a few dots of jam without any additional bread or condiment. This, of course, made some guests disappointed with the menu. On the next menu, Chef Julian served chicken thighs with scissor stabs, a dish he named Memory because it was born from his childhood memories. Chef Julian once stabbed his own father in the thigh because he always came home drunk and often tortured his mother. The guests began to realize that from one menu to another the food served was getting stranger, as was the case when Chef Julian served a tortilla menu, which instead contained the disgrace of the guests. This means that before the event began, the chefs and staff had first found out everything about the guests who attended that night. Margot, who was upset, intended to leave the restaurant, but she was not allowed. She chose to calm herself in the toilet while smoking. Not long after, she was visited directly by Chef Julian, who was curious why Margot did not eat her dishes. With a seemingly indifferent Margot replied that she did not like all the menus served tonight. Long story short, Now the guests are finally presented with the next menu. For this special menu created by a vice chef named Chef Jeremy, he created a menu entitled The Mess. What is the concept of the menu? Yep, in the sense of actual chaos, Chef Jeremy is desperate to shoot himself in front of all the guests. The message he wanted to convey through the menu was well conveyed because what he did succeeded in making the guests panic and there was chaos. A very totality action has been shown by Chef Jeremy so that for the success of the concept of the menu, he is even willing to risk his life. Because he could no longer bear all this, Richard intended to leave the restaurant, but he was stopped by Elsa, who then ordered an officer to cut off one of Richard's ring fingers. What happened made the guests very scared and did not dare try to escape. When all the guests were scared, Tyler was actually very impressed with the concept created by Chef Jeremy. He looked like a psychopath who casually enjoyed a meal in the midst of a tense atmosphere. After that, Margot was called by Chef Julian. He said that Margot was a menu tamper because she shouldn't be there tonight. Chef Julian personally told Margot that tonight's fine dining would end with death. She was given 15 minutes to make a choice whether she would die with the staff or die with the guests. Before the next menu was served, Chef Julian presented a very exciting show. He showed the biggest investor on the island who would be drowned in the sea. It was done because the investor intended to fire Julian and the staff because of what they had done. So Chef Julian and the staff worked together to kill him in front of the guests. 15 minutes later, the time for Margot to think was up. When going to make a choice, Margot finally confessed that she was actually a call girl named Erin. She had previously been hired by Richard and then hired by Tyler for the night. After that, the next dish will begin. For this menu, Chef Julian handed over his position to an assistant chef named Catherine. Casually, Chef Catherine explained that this menu was inspired by her experience, who had almost been raped by Chef Julian. At that moment, she finally got her revenge by attacking Chef Julian after the incident. Chef Catherine invited the male guests to escape, while the female guests will enjoy the meal with him.
This is fantastic.
And within 45 seconds, the other chefs will chase and catch them all. Before the next dish is served, Chef Julian approaches Tyler because he has the most positive response among other guests. Chef Julian reveals that Tyler was invited personally and already knows that the event will end with everyone's death. So that means he deliberately invited Margot instead of inviting his ex-lover. For his actions, Chef Julian deliberately humiliated Tyler by forcing him to cook in the kitchen and insulting his cooking.
You see that now, don't you?
This also made Tyler feel worse until he decided to commit suicide. After that, Chef Julian asked Margot to go get a big pot. The opportunity was used by Margot to sneak into Chef Julian's house. Once inside the house, Margot was caught by Elsa and immediately attacked. There was a fight between them and ended with Elsa's accidental death. Then Margot entered Chef Julian's room and saw newspaper clippings about Chef Julian's past life, working in a fast food restaurant. In addition, Margot also found a radio communication and used the radio to call for help to the Coast Guard. Soon a Coast Guard actually came to the restaurant.
What are you doing?
What kind of a disturbance?
Did anybody here call in a distress?
Radios with their meals.
What's up, Dale? Thank you so much.
For a moment, the guests felt quite relieved because they thought they would be rescued. But it turned out that the Coast Guard was a chef in disguise.
Thank you, Dale. Thank you. Good job.
Because there was no way out anymore, Margot was desperate to say that she didn't like Chef Julian's. Cooking the portions were too small and the cooking was not good because it was not made with love. When Chef Julian asked what she wanted to eat, Margot replied that she ordered a cheeseburger and fries. Hearing that, Chef Julian immediately prepared Margot's order wholeheartedly. Margot took a bite and praised his cheeseburger, then asked if she could take home the rest of the burger that she hadn't eaten yet. Chef Julian happily wrapped the food for Margot and gave her a gift and allowed her to leave. After leaving the restaurant, Margot found a boat and used it to escape the island. While inside the restaurant, the guests were served dessert with biscuit crumbs on the floor and small robes made of marshmallows and hats made of chocolate. Chef Julian then burned down the restaurant and killed all the guests, staff, and himself, until finally the movie The Menu finally finished. This movie shows the situation experienced by a chef who has the responsibility to always meet the satisfaction of his customers. Even though he has tried everything, many of his customers do not appreciate his work, but instead focus on shortcomings and criticism. So when Margot ordered a very simple cheeseburger menu, Chef Julian felt appreciated, especially when Margot seemed to enjoy the dish and even wanted to take home the rest of the dish. But however, what was done by Chef Julian was also unjustified. Thanks for watching and see you soon.